Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. On a hot August morning in 2015, Myles Gray left his small business on the idyllic Sunshine Coast in British Columbia. He was heading to a Vancouver suburb to deliver fresh greenery to floral distributors. A few hours later, he was dead. And after all these years, his family is still wondering why.
It's 17 code 3 HS. The male's unconscious. He's not responding. RCMP non-emergency.
My son is missing, and it's kind of unusual circumstance. He seems very intoxicated or very high.
They made Myles look like he was such a bad guy. He was high on drugs. He was beating all these cops up.
The events surrounding Myles' death have been shrouded and concealed from the Gray family and from the public since it happened.
Just where is the justice? Like, for 7 years, we've all been struggling.
Myles shouldn't have died that day.
Here now is seeking justice for Myles Gray.
He sells salal to local wholesalers, so he would box up all his salal that his pickers would pick, and then he would have his Hino truck, his delivery truck, full of boxes. I couldn't tell you how many boxes of salal he would fit in there, but then every Thursday he would take the ferry to Vancouver and he would go to Burnaby, where there's a floral wholesaling, it's like a district with all the wholesalers there, and he would drop off his boxes.
So that morning, like he was just his normal...
He was his absolute normal self. He was ready for, to get off the coast, to have a little one-day adventure in the big city.
I was sitting actually doing office work at the little desk there, and I get this phone call, and it's Stuart at the shop, and he says, "Do you know where Myles is?" And I'm like, "No, what's going on?" And he says, "Well, Floor Supply has phoned and said they're looking for Myles because the van hasn't moved, and it's in the bay." So right away, I just, you get that like intuitive punch to the gut. Something's wrong.
Charlie 6, we have the mail on view here. 3700 block of Marine, just on the north side.
3700 block Marine, you want cover? I've got Charlie 71 coming, but they're coming from Fraser Marine.
That sounds good. 3800 block of Marine, I'm just looking here.
3800 block Southeast Marine, 10-4.
Charlie 63, can we just hurry up cover here? Just acting a little aggressive.
And I looked at the clock and I'm like, okay, don't overreact, because I could hear Myles in my head. "You always overreact, Mom, don't overreact." But my heart was just pounding, and I'm like, okay, I'll just give it an hour. I'll just give it an hour. The worst decision of my life. So I did wait 1 hour, and then I phoned Stuart and I says, "Have you heard anything? Has the truck moved?" And he said no. And right away, I'm like, right, we're going out there.
So as soon as we got there, his truck was there. So I ran over and looked in his truck, and on the console was his wallet. And in the ignition was the keys sitting right there. They were sitting there. I thought, wow, this is too weird.
So I tried calling him, I tried texting him.
Charlie 71, he's gone up into housing here. 8375 Joffrey. We're with 63. We're just going to go up there and challenge.
63, we're just speaking to him. He's challenging us to fight with us. He seems very intoxicated or very high.
Can I get available units to cover? Male is trying to fight with PCs.
I just got a call from Melissa stating that they were kind of worried and didn't really know where Myles was, and she was worried. She didn't know where he was or what he was getting up to.
I phoned 911 and made out Myles to be a missing person.
RCMP non-emergency.
Hi, my son is missing, and it's kind of unusual circumstance. He came down from the coast today, and he made it to his first stop, and there's no sight of him. Like, his keys, his wallet, his backpack is in there, and I'm thinking he has bipolar, and the guy said he just sort of wandered off.
Charlie 63, have him here. He's not in custody though.
Okay, where's Bravo 17? One more ambulance, please. Code 3.
Another ambulance, code 3, copy.
Yeah, 2 PCs injured, and obviously the photo.
Cover that. Another ambulance required, code 3, 2 PCs injured.
And I do remember the VPD like surrounding us with their cars like we were contained.
This is weird. Here's an adult that's gone missing in the middle of the day, and you get that many cops show up that quick.
At one point, there was this one VPD officer. He looked at Mark and he says, "Mr. Gray, your son is dead."
And we were just like, what the heck? What?
He was in an altercation with the police, and he died of that altercation with the police.
I said to him, I said, what do you mean he's dead? Did you shoot him? And he turned around and he said, well, that's one thing we can say. We didn't shoot him.
They identified my son through his necklaces. They were just full of dirt and full of blood, broken up. That's how we identified Myles, that it was him. We couldn't see him. They didn't send a photo of him, and now I know why. He's unrecognizable.
Welcome back. In August of 2015, a 33-year-old businessman was making his weekly deliveries when he suddenly went missing. His family called police for help, only to discover police were there when he died. We now return to seeking justice for Myles Gray.
I said, what is happening? Tell me, what? And she's like, no, we're coming over. And I said, tell me. And I was getting very angry. I said, tell me what happened.
He said, you need to come home now. And she didn't tell me why.
She didn't want to tell you over the phone.
And I got home and they were just outside and they were all just crying. Just by this tree. And they said he's dead. Like how? Why?
Gray worked as a wholesaler distributor of floral evergreens. On August 13th, 2015, he was making deliveries when police received reports of a man harassing a woman by spraying a garden hose at her near Joffre Avenue and Southeast Marine Drive. The first officer on scene reported an aggressive confrontation with Gray. Backup arrived, pepper spray was used, and a physical altercation broke out in a backyard garden, involving Gray and 8 Vancouver police officers. Some of the officers were injured. Gray did not survive.
Like they made Myles look like he was such a bad guy. He was high on drugs. He was beating all these cops up.
And then they go on like he was Superman. Like, he wasn't Superman. He was strong, but he wasn't Superman. If he was Superman, he wouldn't have died. You know, that's just an excuse for them getting away with beating him as bad as he did.
Gray's sister Melissa said Gray was a lover, not a fighter, calling him her idol growing up.
He loved playing hockey, basketball. He just loved hanging out with his friends, being outside.
He was outrageously outgoing when he wanted to be, but also quiet and full of whatever. I don't even know half the time what was going on in there. No shortage of ability to chat. Like when we would go up to the lake after work, we would sit in our chairs and we would just talk.
I didn't see it coming, really. You know, I did notice that he was not eating. He wasn't sleeping. I just thought, oh, well, you know, he's 18. Maybe he's got a crush on a girl, you know, normal, right? Not to eat and sleep.
And then he ran outside and he kind of started screaming, and then he was on top of my mom's car, and I was like, this is frightening. Like, what is going on?
He ran across the street into the neighbor's yard. So we all ran over there, and Melissa was pretty young, and she was pretty upset. Well, we all were upset. We never experienced anything like that. So I got Myles, and then I put him in the car, and then I just took him to the hospital.
He was in Victoria Hospital for a couple weeks, maybe a month, and then he eventually came home.
But they got him on meds, and yeah, he'd never had anything since then.
When did he get into bodybuilding?
Well, a lot of his buddies, like his high school buddies, like they you know, right, they drank, and he was like, oh, I hate this. I hate the way it makes me feel. I hate being hungover in the morning, not having an appetite. And he's like, and I just feel so depressed after I drink. And so he just stopped drinking, and then he just got really into the gym.
He was in heavy-duty construction. He had a broken scaphoid. When he was in Vernon, working at the hospital up there, he just phoned and says, Mom, I can't do this line of work anymore. It's just too painful. He came up to the coast to visit his granny and went to go see his uncle. And that's when he found out his uncle had the business for sale. And so Myles came to the table and he's like, I want to buy this business. And he did really well.
What was he like as a boss?
He had a sense of humor. I saw him laugh about some of the silliest things, and just simply a wonderful gentleman. Yeah, even a gentleman, which is rare to find nowadays.
Let's go back to that day then. What do you think Myles' state of mind was?
He was muttering to himself. He was walking with no shoes, no shirt. He essentially walked away from his delivery truck. They said he was kind of talking to the sky, spinning in circles. That's not what my brother does. He's a businessman. So I think he was having a manic episode and he was clearly in distress, and what he needed was help. He needed somebody to come help him. He needed someone to talk to him. But he was met with force.
BC's police watchdog is investigating the latest police-related death. It began with a report of a man causing a disturbance on the Vancouver-Burnaby border, and it escalated into a struggle that left 6 officers hurt and the suspect dead.
The IIO, or Independent Investigations Office, investigates any time police may have been involved in an incident that led to the serious harm or death of any individual in British Columbia. And our job is to investigate those incidents and determine whether or not the actions of police may justify charges being considered by the Crown.
When did the IIO first get involved in the death of Myles Gray?
August 13th, 2015, the day of his death. It was a challenging case in that while there were many witnesses to the periphery of the incident, there were very few witnesses who actually saw what happened. And in the end, we only had a few what we call witness officers, or police officers who had a connection to the case, who had relevant evidence to offer about the use of force. In the end, we had 5 people who we termed as subject officers, who we felt were responsible for the use of force that may have led to his death.
A BC police watchdog probe into the death of a Sechelt man in 2015 is being looked at again. Myles Gray suffered fatal injuries during a violent encounter with several Vancouver police officers, but the coroner was unable to work out how he died.
On the original autopsy, the results were inconclusive. So, asphyxia, they said it could possibly be kratom, meterginine, enlarged heart, and excited delirium were listed as possible causes, so they couldn't come up with a definitive cause of death for Myles.
The Independent Investigations Office has sent its final report to the province's prosecution service. It's now up to them to decide whether or not to move forward with charges in connection with the death of Myles Gray.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. 7 Vancouver police officers will not face charges for their role in a violent arrest back in 2015 that ended in the death of 33-year-old Myles Gray.
1,952 days since Myles Gray died unarmed. We now know inconsistent evidence from those officers involved contributed to no charges being laid, compounded by no conclusive cause of death.
There wasn't an inch of his body that wasn't beaten or bruised. That's not serve and protect.
The autopsy report, a grim laundry list of trauma, hemorrhaged and ruptured testicles, a blown-out fractured eye socket, his jaw bilaterally dislocated, his nose broken, his sternum, rib, and voice box fractured, his neck and throat significantly bruised and hemorrhaged, with more bleeding in his brain. We now know Gray was not only pepper sprayed, but handcuffed and hobbled, his hands and feet bound. From the very beginning, Vancouver police have offered little in the way of answers about the incident. On Wednesday, the department still refusing to comment on the case beyond a written 2-sentence statement. And this.
For everyone involved, this has been a very difficult, tragic situation. It's hard.
How could you not press charges Like, how could you not? We literally lost our minds. So.
And then I was like, what are our next steps? And it was kind of like, oh, well, there'll be an inquest. Well, an inquest doesn't do much.
Welcome back. It's been more than 8 years since Myles Gray died during an altercation with Vancouver police. In 2020, BC's prosecution service declined to lay charges against any officers involved. Well, now the coroner's inquest begins, mandatory when someone dies in police custody. The jury will determine whether his death is an accident, a homicide, or undetermined. And just a note, other than the actual dispatch recordings, the rest of the transcripts you hear will be voiced by actors.
What does it feel like to have to go to this inquest?
All along I said I wasn't going to go because, you know, this is the coroner's. I didn't think really involved me at all. I didn't want to hear about it. I've been hearing about it for 8 years. I've been reciting this list over and over again and hearing about these like horrific things they did to my son. And then just recently I thought, you know, I think those officers would be really relieved that the mother's not there. And you know what? I don't even want to give them that. So I'm going to just try and power through it.
On Monday began the long-awaited coroner's inquest into the death of Myles Gray during a violent police confrontation near the Vancouver-Burnaby border.
My name is Ian Donaldson. I'm a lawyer, and I was counsel to the Gray family at the inquest into the death of Myles Gray.
A coroner's jury is hearing agonizing detail about the violent confrontation that left police officers injured and caused grievous injury to Myles Gray.
Gray died after a fight with Vancouver police near the Vancouver-Burnaby border almost 8 years ago. A warning, some of the details revealed at the inquest today are disturbing. Imadagahi reports.
Vancouver Police Emergency Line.
Hi there. We have a problem here. There is a guy who bothered my neighbor. She's a middle-aged woman.
911 callers explained Gray was wandering around a southeast Vancouver neighborhood, shirtless, disoriented, and in clear mental distress or crisis. Despite the fact he was unarmed, police testified he was displaying threatening behavior.
What I recall is that Constable Sahota had some discussions. She had some discussions with Myles. Myles was acting erratically. She became a bit nervous as a result of the discussions, the interaction. She retreated to her vehicle, got into her vehicle. He apparently grabbed the window or something like that. She put the window up. He tried to open the door. She closed the door. She radioed for backup.
Charlie 63, can you just hurry up cover here? Just acting a little aggressive.
As I turned around and looked up at the staircase, he was standing at the top of the stairs, and he made a motion by straightening his arms. And in a very kind of incredible Hulk stance, he said, "Welcome to the jungle."
And it was, as I recall, Constables Bursneck and Folkstead who were next to arrive.
371, he's gone up into housing here, 8375 Joffrey. We're with 63. We're just going to go up there and challenge.
As soon as they arrived, I said this male went up the stairs and that he was aggressive and he was going to fight. We didn't discuss anything else.
Did you have a plan?
Not at that point.
We spot Mr. Gray by the house. He had no shirt on. He was pacing back and forth, and he was saying, "The Charlies are coming." As soon as I saw that, I thought, we're going to slow this down. In my mind, we're dealing with mental health, or drugs, or a combination of both.
63, we're just speaking to him. He's challenging us to fight with us. He seems very intoxicated or very high.
Can I get available units to cover? Male is trying to fight with PCs.
I tried to reassure him that the Charlies were not coming. I did tell him we were police, and I wanted him to take a seat.
PC Bursneck started to make verbal commands, asking the male to get down on the floor. At that point, the male did not comply. and OC spray was deployed by PC Brznik.
The start of that interaction is from my perspective, critical to looking at what follows. Constable Brznik tells him to get down on his knees. He's certainly not told he's under arrest or anything like that. Get on your knees. He doesn't. And the next thing that happens is that Brznik sprays him in the face with pepper spray.
I wouldn't say it was 100% effective, but it did kind of stun him. It slowed him down. He was taking some time wiping it off his face.
Mr. Gray stumbled forward. He was disoriented by the spray. I saw it as a chance to move in and get control of things. I moved in and grabbed his right arm. I remember feeling his arm, thinking he's really built. Constable Sahota, I think, tried to handcuff him as well. I think one cuff went on. We almost had him. At that point, he was compliant. And then all of a sudden, he just ripped his arms out and squared off against us.
Charlie 6-3. Problem here. He's not in custody.
I think I was there for 5 of the 11 days, and just to sit there and hear the audio and to hear my brother screaming and just to recount all of it I feel like it split me wide open again.
Before you have him, how are we gone in custody?
He resists having handcuffs put on, and the violence begins, and the violence is significant and profound, and it, to my mind, is a pivotal event in the way everything else unfolds.
The male forcibly pushed him off. PC Folkestad tried to go grab him or take control of him, and that's when the male punched PC Folkestad.
Either he hit me or grabbed me. I'm not entirely sure of this whole sequence, but I remember striking him in the face a bunch of times, trying to get him to the ground. What level of force would you have been using? Pretty strong level of force. Punching him in the head. I didn't think anything else would work at that point. I thought we were going to have to shoot him.
I do recall the fight starting, at which point I struck Mr. Gray in the leg, in the thigh with my baton. I'll say 1 or 2 times.
I took my baton out and also struck the male in the legs. I believe I struck him 3 times, and at that point this male did not feel any pain or there was 0 effect.
Using my leverage, I managed to take him to the ground. He landed on his back. I landed on the top. We landed in a strange spot.
The units come up the stairs. We're under the tree.
Units 10 up the stairs, up the tree, 8375 Joffrey, just on the Burnaby side.
Constables Wong and Thompson arrived. It would appear that he was on the ground when the other 2 show up. So there are now a total of 5. Constable Wong, as I recall, is the one who brought his hobble.
I ran up the stairwell and I entered the backyard where I saw 3 constables. Constable Brznik, Constable Folkestad, and Constable Sahota fighting with Mr. Gray. Constable Brznik was beneath Mr. Gray, holding him in somewhat of a bear hug. I went to his feet or leg area and took out a hobble, which is similar to a cord, with a mechanism that allows you to cinch it tight. It's what we use to restrain combative suspects. It's meant to be used on their ankles, and you are to cinch it up tight to prevent them from kicking you.
We got a plan. We're going to hobble him first, and then we're going to pull him out from under the...
Have a plan. You're going to haul him first and then try to pull him out?
I said to Mr. Gray, "Hey man, it's the police. You're under arrest. Do what we say and you won't get hurt." I started to put the hobble around his legs, and then he let out this gigantic kick. I ended up striking my head on one of the low-lying branches there.
Mr. Gray began breaking free of my grip. I delivered less than 5, but more than 1 knee strike to his torso. I believe it was to his left side.
I kicked him, I think, 5 times in the legs. My strikes were ineffective.
Okay, we're... Bravo 17, one more ambulance, please. Go through.
Sorry, one more... something for code 3?
Ambulance.
Another ambulance, code 3, copy.
Okay, 2 PCs injured, and obviously the schedule.
Another ambulance required code 3, 2 PCs injured.
I withdrew my baton after it had already been partially drawn, because Mr. Gray had pulled on it, and I struck Mr. Gray less than 5 times, but more than once on his upper left arm between his elbow and shoulder. I then drew my OC spray I discharged the OC spray at his face, landing on his nose and mouth area for approximately 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds. I don't remember.
And Myles, on the vast bulk of the evidence, never gets off the ground, ever.
Mr. Gray continued to fight with me. I know there were other police officers there, but at the time it felt like it was only him and I.
Virtually every officer said, I only know what I was doing and here's what I did, and I didn't see anybody else.
I'm watching Mr. Gray throw the most devastating haymaker punches with a handcuff attached to his hand directed to anyone coming within striking distance of him. I remember thinking, I'm going to need to break Mr. Gray's wrist to stop him from doing this. I believe I struck him twice in the wrist with a baton. That was right around the point when 2 more members came. Derek Kane and Bo Spencer arrived.
Bravo 17, we are on scene. We are taking him into custody now.
Bravo 17 on scene, taking him into custody.
I'm no medical professional, but at the academy, we learned about excited delirium, and at this point, I believe he was going through excited delirium.
The first thing I did was take hold of Mr. Gray's left hand and wrist and attempted to perform a wrist lock. That's simply bending the wrist over, and it inflicts an extreme amount of pain, and in essence, it's to gain compliance. This appeared to have no effect on Mr. Gray, and he pulled away.
I went to the upper right side of the body, his right arm, and tried to get his arm from underneath him to behind his back. PC Wong was with me, and both of us, using all of our strength, were unable to move him. After this use of force method failed, I moved to striking Mr. Gray 3 to 4 times in the shoulder region.
He was again prone, laying flat on the ground. I placed my left knee on Mr. Gray's right temple and my right knee on Mr. Gray's left shoulder. It wasn't for more than a second, and Mr. Gray lifted his head and upper body and lifted me completely off balance, and I fell off of him.
At one point, we have to end this. I had the opportunity to put on a vascular neck restraint, which I did.
What does that mean?
It's when you encircle someone's neck. The idea is what you're trying to do is slow the blood flow to the brain temporarily. So it's temporary unconsciousness.
I delivered multiple knee strikes to his left upper arm. I don't remember how many. It was at least 2, possibly 3, and no more than 4 knee strikes.
He's still fighting.
Male still fighting.
There was a baton on the ground in close proximity. I remember I hit him with the baton as hard as I could in the lower legs.
Around this time, Sahota gets whacked by her partner's baton and wants to go down the hill. So Folkstad and Sahota at some point head down the hill, leaving only 5 men and Myles.
17, he's still fighting.
We're male still fighting.
Then I saw another opportunity to apply it. This time, I got it on. I had some reaction, but he didn't go unconscious. But I think it was enough to change his behavior, because that's when I was told, okay, we got him in handcuffs now. At that point, I released the pressure.
17, we got him in custody.
4, have the male in custody. Charlie 5-1 copy.
And 17, code 3 HS. The male's unconscious. He's not responding.
Copy. HS code 3, male party unconscious, not responding.
So according to the dispatch records, 10 seconds after the handcuffs are finally applied, officers report that Myles lost consciousness. So the entire confrontation to this point with police has lasted 8 minutes, and he's hobbled, handcuffed, and unconscious.
The first time. And not only is he handcuffed, hobbled, and unconscious, by this point on all the evidence, he's got a fractured orbit, a broken nose, a dislocated jaw, a fracture in the cartilage behind his voice box, a broken rib, a bilateral testicular hemorrhage, and significant and substantial bruising from multiple applications of the baton.
Bravo 2-1, make it ALS, code 3.
Copy. Make it an ALS. We have a total of 3 ambulances going in total. Do we need more?
Let's do 4 as quick as you can.
And his face went deep red. I knew at that time Mr. Gray stopped breathing. I performed a vigorous sternal rub, so with my knuckles I rubbed them on his sternum, the middle of his chest, as hard as I could in hopes that would trigger his breathing reflex to start again, and thankfully after a few seconds he did.
And 3 Bravo 2-1, if this guy comes to, we're going to need a sedation protocol from ALS. So wherever they are, have them respond code 3, tell them to free them up. 7-1, he's 2, and he's still combative here on the ground.
Male is still being combative?
Correct.
10-4 male has come to, but he's being combative.
I went back to that posturing and flexing and fight. As many members as there were holding him down. And that continued for what felt like eternity. The fire department showed up. I yelled at them to go back down the stairs. There was nothing a basic life support paramedic could do. He was still not under control.
Welcome back. During the coroner's inquest into the death of Myles Gray, the police officers involved said they couldn't recall specific injuries. A direct contrast to the paramedics' and firefighters' testimony. We now return to seeking justice for Myles Gray.
7-1, he's 2, and he's still combative here on the ground.
Male is still being combative?
Correct.
10-4 male has come to, but he's being combative.
Yeah, 7 Yankee 98, what's the status of the ALS car? Are they coming?
Well, we've updated them, and we've told them that, so I would assume they are.
Bravo 2-1, if there's an NCO monitoring to maybe relay through the white shirts and their supervisors, we need ALS here now.
There was a moment of clarity. Still to this day, it gives me chills and gave me hope. In the moment where Mr. Gray turned his head and looked at me directly in the face and said, "What's going on?" It gave me a sense it will all be over. I told him, "You've been in a fight with officers and the ambulance is on its way." He did not give me a response and went back to his animalistic state.
He was face down, with his chest on the ground. I saw they were struggling with Mr. Gray, even though PC Bowater had the hobble strapped around his ankles and pulled taut. I put my right knee onto Mr. Gray's right hamstring, my left knee onto his right calf. I was there for quite a few minutes.
Did you see blood on his forehead?
Not that I can recall.
He had a broken nose. Did you see any blood consistent with a broken nose?
I don't recall.
I don't recall any blood. I don't recall anything. I don't remember his eyes. I don't remember seeing any form of injury.
Did you observe any signs of injuries or other presentations?
None. At that time, no. I didn't notice anything obvious. I didn't see any blood on his body, any open cuts, anything like that.
I don't recall seeing blood. I feel like blood would have stood out to me, but no, I didn't.
Most officers said they couldn't recall any visible injuries or blood on Gray. In contrast, firefighters and paramedics testified the patient was black and blue and bleeding.
He was beaten pretty bad regardless of circumstances. I didn't think he was a white guy. This guy's dark skin. It wasn't dark skin, it was bruising.
Advanced life support paramedic Jeanette Ziegler testified Gray was swollen with quite a few injuries to the side of his head, blood to his mouth, elongated red bruising to his thigh. Quote, "I remember that picture is still in my mind."
I remember seeing the patient had been handcuffed with his hands behind his back. There was one officer on his head or neck. There was one officer on top of his torso. There was one officer on the back of his legs. There was a fourth officer with strapping or webbing around both ankles, and that officer was pulling back in an effort to subdue the patient. There was bruising around both eyes. I remember abrasions on his face, on his forehead. I remember there being a lot of blood. I don't believe he was wearing a shirt. There was bruising on his arms, on his back, on his legs.
At any time, were you concerned Mr. Gray could not breathe as a result of a police officer holding his head down to the ground?
Yes.
Forensic pathologist Dr. Matthew Ord testified Myles Gray died in a perfect storm of factors in August 2015.
What we can say with some degree of certainty based on the reported circumstances surrounding Mr. Gray's death, the autopsy findings, and a careful review of published literature is I don't think he would have died when he did had it not been for the police interaction on that day.
He was beaten and forcibly held down until he couldn't breathe, he couldn't communicate.
Gray died of cardiopulmonary arrest, complicated by the police subduing him and holding him down.
Did the IO learn any additional information that came out of the inquest that wasn't included in your original report to prosecution?
Well, in particular, what we learned was the toxicology evidence changed, in particular with respect to the substance known as kratom and whether or not that was present in Mr. Gray's body. Effectively, the evidence now is not sufficient to support that there was any. And also the idea of how Mr. Gray died what some people, the term that some people use of excited delirium, whether that played a role, and that theory has been largely discounted in both by forensic pathologists now and by academics, and is a term that is discouraged from use. And more importantly, though, when testifying, the forensic pathologist testified that it was his view that had it not been for the use of force, Mr. Gray would not have died that day.
At the coroner's inquest into the violent death of Myles Gray, officers have testified they were told not to take notes at the direction of the Vancouver Police Union.
If that's what happened, the union person was giving them instructions which are directly contrary to Vancouver Police Department policy. Those policies exist for good reasons. The public, I think, have a right to expect is that police officers will do their duty, and that includes recording what happened.
When I see situations where there are potential charges, in other words, where some might say police have crossed the line or perhaps crossed the line, generally I think it's because too often they mistake or overemphasize the risk of something happening with an actual threat. They tend to categorize behavior instead of analyzing the behavior well enough. I find that there's a lack of good critical thinking or sufficient critical thinking in stressful situations, and they tend to escalate rather than de-escalate when necessary.
We got rid of the clutter, the kratom, the excited delirium, and all that other rubbish, and what was left was Dr. Ord's view of the cause of death, in his opinion, that became a proper foundation for the jury's verdict.
We begin tonight with breaking news. The jury in the Myles Gray inquest has returned with its recommendations. Our Kristen Robinson has been following this story and joins us with the breaking details. And Kristen, that jury has also ruled Gray's death was a homicide.
Sophie, that's right. After deliberating for just over 5 hours today, the 5-person coroner's jury returned with a verdict classifying Myles Gray's death as a homicide. The cause, cardiopulmonary arrest, complicated by police restraining him. Now, the jury made 3 recommendations to prevent similar deaths in the future, 2 directed at the chief constable of the BPD to expedite the implementation of body cameras for all officers and to review and enhance de-escalation training. The 3rd was for the head of the Provincial Health Services Authority to review the handling of toxicology samples.
As I understand the evidence before we started, the police position, the position of the VPD has always been that the death was in effect natural causes. And I think the verdict, from my perspective, the jury's verdict puts an end to that.
Myles' name is cleared. Like, they kept saying he had drugs in his body. He died because of excited delirium. You take all those out of account now, all there is police beating. So it's a huge weight off of the family.
We're here today to celebrate the life of Myles Gray, one of our best friends.
Myles lived a very clean life. The guy didn't drink, the guy didn't do drugs, he was into his health. When I'm running mountains and like this man I've become, I know Myles will be so proud of me, and he's looking down on me saying, "I love you, Matt, keep going, dude."
Amazing man, I don't know what else to say. I just wish he was still here.
I would see him as probably having a family at this point, and yeah, extending that circle around him a little more, yeah.
He would have been an excellent father.
Yeah.
Excellent. And husband, he would have.
Yeah, and engaged in what the process, what that means to be a good father, a good family man, just a good person. He was always very motivated to be the best he could be.
Like, my son is 6, so his entire life, this has been something that that has been in the background, and that he's heard these conversations. He asks about Uncle Myles. He says, "Why did the police kill him?"
Holy.
Where is it mentioned?
The red ball.
But I think about the time frame of if I'd have left when I'd left, and I know you can't redo history, but I would have got there when he was alive. I would have found him. And I do have a lot of guilt over that, of waiting. And I wish I didn't.
I'm glad the truth came out. That's the big thing, is the truth, right? Like, our family, immediate family, we all know what happened. We just know. But now it's out to the public what did happen, right? I don't know where it's going to go from here, but it's a start. Actually, it's a good start. It's a start. 8 years later, it's a start. Yeah.
I think it is important for us to reevaluate this case, to have another look at it, and determine whether or not it should be referred back to the Crown to allow them to reevaluate their original opinion.
We extend our deepest condolences to Myles Gray's family members and friends who loved him dearly. We recognize that nothing can change the events that transpired the day Myles died, and no words can take away the pain and sorrow from his family. The coroner's jury has now delivered 2 recommendations for police, and we will review them carefully. These recommendations build on processes that are currently or are substantially underway. We believe all police officers should have access to the most up-to-date training on crisis de-escalation and mental health. And we are currently implementing a pilot program to equip all frontline officers with body-worn cameras in the near future.
I don't feel like recommendations are justice. The recommendations were mental health training. Well, these officers work in Vancouver, they're the front lines. They should have mental health training. They talked about body cameras. I think that's kind of like a little bit too late.
Some people think that the way to have dealt with Myles that day, even after his erratic interactions, would have been to come up to that lawn and sit down. Just sit down and talk to him. He hadn't hit anybody. He hadn't injured anybody. One of the civilian who'd called in, one of the people who'd called in said, "I wasn't worried about myself. I was worried for him."
More than 8 years after Myles Gray died, his case is far from over. BC's police watchdog is weighing whether to send the case back to the prosecution service for consideration of charges. And officers are still facing a disciplinary hearing up to and including dismissal from the force. The chief of the Vancouver Police Department declined to be interviewed for this program. Myles' family is still seeking justice for their son. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast, now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.